Hello and welcome to an Auto Tuts Plus course. I'm Adi Purdila, and in this course you'll learn everything you need to get started with Adobe XD. And for those of you who don't know, XD is a very popular app for UI and UX design that allows you to effortlessly create websites, mobile apps, icons, and more. Now, being such a powerful app, XD has lots of features, lots of tools. So to cover all of this, we're going to take it step by step and structure this course in 3 chapters. The first one is all about the basics. Here you'll learn how to work with artboards, shapes, text, and images. In the second chapter, we'll explore some of XD's more advanced features like components, responsive layouts, and plugins. Finally, in the third chapter, we'll cover XD's prototyping features, including Auto-Animate, which is a simple and powerful way of adding animations to XD prototypes. All right, we have a lot to go through, so let's get started with the basics. In the next lesson, you'll learn how to create and manage artboards. See you there. Welcome to the first lesson of this course, where you'll learn how to create and manage artboards. But first, let's see how we can get Adobe XD and also do a quick tour of the interface. To get Adobe XD, you can go to this address right here and then hit on download, and it's going to take you to this page. Now, you need to have an Adobe account to continue, so either create one, or if you already have an account, go ahead and sign in. I'm going to sign in with my account. Here it's going to ask you a few questions like what are your skill levels with XD? Let's just say beginners. I am a visual graphic designer and I'm downloading XD for myself. Continue. And next, it's going to tell you that XD is being installed by the Creative Cloud desktop app. This is true regardless of the operating system you're using. So XD works on both Mac and Windows. So if you already have the Creative Cloud desktop app installed like I do, it's going to prompt you to open it. If not, it's going to download and install that app. So I'm just going to hit Open Creative Cloud Desktop App. And right here, you can see that XD is already installed on my system. Now, before we open this, I just want to quickly talk about the plans you can choose. So let's go back to Creative Cloud and I hit on Upgrade Plan. You're going to see a list of all the available plans you can purchase. The ones that we're interested in are this one, which is Adobe XD, $10 a month, or All Apps, which is $53 a month. Which includes everything, basically, the whole Adobe suite. So if you're just getting started with XD, you can use it for free, actually. So XD is a free product, but if you're paying $10 a month, you do get access to shared prototypes, design specs, and also cloud storage, and also access to Adobe Portfolio, Fonts, and Spark. We're going to use the free version that I have here installed. So let's go ahead and open it. And this is the opening screen for XD. From here, you can start a new design. You can open a design that you previously worked on. Let's choose this one. Double click, and it's going to open up this window here. So now a quick tour of the interface. This right here in the middle is the canvas. This is an artboard. Let's actually delete it. On the left side, we have the tool panel. From here, you can select the different tools that you want to use. This is where you switch from layers to assets to plugins. On the right side, we have the inspector panel. So depending on which item you select in your canvas, you'll have different properties here in the inspector. On the top here, you have an option to go back to your home screen. And also you can switch from design mode to prototype mode to share mode. But we'll talk more about these as the course progresses. This is where you can name your document, and you can select where to save it, either in the cloud or on your computer. And here we have some prototyping features like mobile preview, desktop preview, and also zooming features. So as I was saying, we're going to go through these as the course progresses. Right now, let's talk about artboards. How do you create and manage them? First of all, artboards are specific areas you can create in your infinite canvas, and these areas can contain objects or groups of objects. So for example, if you're designing a mobile app, you can grab the artboard tool, which is this, or you can press A on your keyboard, and you can drag a specific size artboard, or you can choose from a preset that can be found on this right-hand side. So we find presets for Apple devices. Here is the preset name and also the size in pixels. Google presets for Android, Microsoft for Surface devices, and also web. So if you're creating websites, you have a couple of presets you can use to get started. Let's choose Web 1280, and that's going to create an artboard that's 1280 by 800. You can find the width and height right here in the inspector. If at some point you decide, okay, this is too small for me, no problem. You can simply select the artboard and resize it using any of these controls. You might have noticed this dotted line here. That actually highlights the viewport height, which is set right here. So for example, if you are designing for a specific screen size like 1280 by 800, by using this feature, you're going to see where is the viewport limit. So what elements will you be seeing on your screen at one point? Anything below this line is basically below the fold and can only be accessed when you scroll down the page. Now, you can also change the orientation of an artboard by using these two buttons. So you can switch between portrait and landscape. Now, for an artboard, you always have the option to change its fill color. So you can remove it altogether, or you can change it to whatever color you want. And you can choose between a solid color, a linear gradient, or a radial gradient. If at any point you want to delete an artboard, you simply select it either from the canvas or from the layer list, and you can hit delete, or you can right click here and say delete. Renaming an artboard is really simple. Simply double click on the artboard name here, or you can right click and select rename. Now you can have as many artboards as you want in your project. Simply by clicking on these presets, you can create a vast number of artboards. Now you can use the keyboard shortcuts Control-0 on Windows or Command-0 on a Mac to see all of your artboards, or you can hit Control or Command-1 to zoom to 100%, or you can select one artboard or one object and hit Command or Control-3, and that's gonna zoom in so you can see that object fully. Now, you might have noticed that when I was hovering on some of these artboards, we get a little change of cursor here. We get a handle. These are called artboard guides, and you can drag them from the top or from the left side. And those pink numbers and lines will tell you the dimensions or the distance between this guide and the edges of the artboard. Right now I have 100 pixels distance between the guide and the left-hand side of the page. And you can do the same from the top, and you can add as many guides as you want. If at some point you want to delete a guide, simply drag it and drag it back to the edge it came from. These are very useful, for example, when you want to align certain objects to the guides. They simply snap in place very easily. Now, something else you might have seen when I had an artboard selected is this grid option. Well, you can create grids in XD very simple, very easily. Let's select this artboard, for example. Check grid. Here you have an option to select a layout grid or a square grid. The square grid looks something like this. It's a square and you can specify the grid size. Here's 8, and if you want to change it to 16, you can do that as well. This is very useful for creating icons. But for web designers in particular, the layout grid is very useful because you can create these vertical columns, and you can choose the number of columns, the color, the gutter width, and the column width. You can also choose to center the grid, and that's going to create equal margins on the left and right, or you can choose different margins for left and right. And of course, having this grid allows you to snap items and quickly align them to the grid columns. Very, very useful feature. Now, before we wrap up this lesson, I just want to quickly mention that XD allows you to open Photoshop and Sketch files directly, so you don't need to have any of those apps installed on your system, which is fantastic in case you want to switch from Photoshop or Sketch to XD. You can do that, no problem, and be confident that you'll be able to open the files that you worked on in those apps in XD. To quickly demonstrate, I downloaded two files. One is a Sketch file, one is an Photoshop file. So to open these, I'm going to go back to XD to the home screen here. I'm going to choose my computer, and I'm going to navigate to those files. Select the Photoshop first, hit open, and depending on the complexity of the Photoshop file, this might take longer. So this is the Photoshop file, and right here we have access to basically all of the layers in that file. And if we want to open the Sketch file, again, my computer, let's go to this new Morphic UI kit. And there it is. Of course, we're missing some fonts here, but that's beyond the point. The idea is you can very easily open Sketch and Photoshop files in XD, which is fantastic. All right, and that's how you can create and manage artboards in XD. Now, let's move on and learn about working with lines and shapes, and that's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to work with lines and shapes. And these, along with the text tool, represent the bread and butter of any UI design in Adobe XD. We're going to go into a lot of detail for these tools, so let's begin. First, let's work with the line tool, and you can quickly select the line tool from this panel here on the left, or you can press the letter L, and to create a line, simply click and drag, and whenever you're happy with the result, just release it, and you've just created a line with a starting point and an ending point. If you're not happy with how this looks like, you can grab any of the points and you can move them to make the line longer or shorter, and also change its position. Now, if you want to draw a straight line, which is gonna happen in like most of the cases, you can do it in two ways. If you've already drawn a line like this and you want to make it straight, then grab one of the points and hold Shift on your keyboard. And this is gonna snap it at 45-degree increments. So this is a flat horizontal line. This is at 45, this is at 90, so a vertical line, and it just goes on and on like this. And whenever you're happy, just release. And now you have a perfectly horizontal line. Or if you're drawing the line from the start, you can also hold Shift and then click and drag, and you can create the line directly like this, either perfectly horizontally or at increments of 45 degrees. So right now I just drew a perfectly vertical line. Now, when you select a line, you have a couple of different options in the inspector. And we're going to focus on the Appearance tab right here. You can change the opacity of a line either by moving the slider, by manually entering a value here, or by using the number keys 1 through 0. So 1 is 10%, 2 is 20, 3, 4, 5, and so on. If you do these in rapid succession, for example, 5, 6, it's going to give you 56%. If you just do 5, it's going to give you 50%. 0 will give you 100%. Then, to change its color or thickness, you will change the border property, because a line doesn't have a fill property. It just has a border property. So if you remove the border, that line is gone. You cannot see it anymore. So on the border, you can change the color. Only solid. So you cannot do radial gradient or linear gradient on it. And you can change the size. 3 pixels, for example, makes a thicker line. And then you can also make a dotted line by using the dash and gap options. So if I do 5 dash, 5 gap, this is what you get. Also, let's remove these. On a line, you have the option to specify how the end of the line will look like using these options here. This is a butt cap, but here is a round cap, and here is a projecting cap. So projecting cap basically has this extra space right here. The butt cap doesn't have it. It just starts where the original point started. You can also add shadows to a line, and you have the option to change the X, Y, and also the blur values, and also the color and opacity of that shadow. And if you want, you can also add a background blur, but we'll talk about this in a future lesson. But yeah, that's how you can work with the line tool. Now let's move on to the shape tool. And this is probably the one that you're going to be using most, because with it you can create rectangles, or you can create squares by holding down Shift. This will make sure that the width and height are both equal. And in terms of customizability, you can also change its opacity. This is available for pretty much every object you select. But special on the rectangle or square is the ability to add rounded corners. So if you can see these handles on each corner of our object, if we drag on them, click and drag, we can change the border radius or corner radius. If you want, you can manually input this value, and it's going to apply the same radius to all 4 corners. But if we switch from this option to this option, we can change each corner radius individually. So I can have 15 on this one. I can have 0 on this one. Now also, when I select a shape like this, it doesn't matter if it's a square or a rectangle. Besides the ability to change the border, I can also change its fill color. So I can choose between a solid color or a linear gradient or a radial gradient. So these are all options. And since we're on the topic of the color picker, let me just show you this. You can save color swatches by clicking this little plus button. And these will be available later on. If you decide you want to create another shape and you want to use the exact same color, you can do that in 2 different ways. So select the shape, go to fill, and now you have these available to choose from. Or you can grab the eyedropper tool and you can pick a color from the screen, either from the canvas or from anywhere inside the application. So click that and it's going to pick that exact same color. And this is actually a shortcut key that's available inside XD, regardless of where you are and what you have selected. You can hit I on the keyboard and it's going to open up the eyedropper tool. Now, apart from being able to change the fill color, you can also change the border color, just like I showed you on the line tool. But now you have some additional options for the border. So let me change the fill to white here so you can see this better. You can change where the border is positioned. So is it an inner border or an outer border or a center border? So actually, let me change this to a very light gray so you can see the difference. Okay, so the border here, currently it's set to center. So part of the border is inside the shape, part of it is outside the shape. Here is outer, so the entire border is outside of my fill area, and this is inner. So the border is now inside my shape. We also have the same controls for the caps here, but we also can decide how the border joints are made. So we have a miter join here by default. We can choose a round join, or we can choose one. This is called a bevel join. So it just creates this nice cutoff here. Now on shapes, you can also add shadows and background blurs. So that was the shape tool. Now, hand in hand with the shape tool, we have the ellipse tool. And this is used to create ellipses, or if we hold down Shift, we can create perfect circles. So this is the preferred way of creating circles, even though you can create a square and then just round off its corners completely, and that will also create a circle. The difference is using the shape tool, or the rectangle tool, excuse me, you can still change the corner radius, but if you're using the ellipse tool, you don't have that option anymore. This is an ellipse by default, and you can make it into an ellipse or hold down Shift and resize it as a circle. Another very useful tool is the polygon tool, which is this with the shortcut Y. So with polygon, Again, you can drag and drop. And this is used to create polygons. That means triangles, rectangles, and so on. Depending on how many sides you have, you will decide what kind of shape you want. So by default, you would create a triangle with 3 points or 3 sides. But if you change this to 4, that's going to be a rhombus. 5 is going to be a pentagon. 6, a hexagon. And you can go as high as you want. And you can also specify a corner radius, either with this handle or by changing this value here. And star ratio will basically allow you to create a star using your polygon. So to demonstrate, let me actually create a triangle here. And if I hold down Shift, I'm going to create an equilateral triangle. So all 3 sides are equal. And if I start changing the star ratio, for example, 90, you can see that these points here will start falling inwards. And that's going to allow me to create a star. And if I hold down Shift, I can move in increments of 10%. And if I let go, it's basically free form. And I can change this bit to do the exact same thing. So this is an example of a star created with a triangle. But let's do a pentagon here with 5 sides. And I'm going to change the ratio to about 30% to create the star shape that most of us know. Now, the final tool you can use to create shapes is the pen tool. And this is probably the one that gives you the most freedom, because you can basically create shapes from a variety of points that you draw. And you can create any shape you want with this technique. And this is also editable. So you can double click and you can select each point afterwards and change it to whatever you want. And a shape that was created with the pen tool has pretty much the same properties as one created with either the rectangle, ellipse, or polygon tool. You can change its opacity, fill, border, you can add shadow and background blur. So those are the tools you can use to create shapes in Adobe XD. Before we wrap things up, there are just a couple more things that I want to show you. The first one is about radial gradients, because I did briefly touch on them, but I never got into a lot of detail. So to add a radial gradient, you would go to Fill, you would change the color mode from solid to radial. And this will basically let you define the center and also the actual radius of your gradient. And to change the colors, you simply select them from here. And you can then use these controls to pinpoint your color. And then you would select the second color. And you would then choose it in the same manner from here. If you want to add another color to this gradient, you simply click anywhere in the slider, and that's going to create another color stop. And then you can use that to define your own color. Since we have the color picker open here, there is something else I want to tell you, and that is you can now switch between color modes using this drop-down menu. You can switch between hex, RGB, and HSB, which is hue, saturation, brightness. RGB is red, green, blue, and hex is this color format that we're accustomed with. Now, if you have multiple objects created and you want to add or change the same property on all of them at the same time, you can simply select all of them and you can go and change any of their properties here. Or you can also group them by selecting all of them, right-click group, or hit Control or Command G, and that's going to create a group. And you can see it right here in the Layers panel. So I can now select this group, and I can do the same thing. And this is super, super handy. Now, since we're on the Layers panel, let's say that I have a big project with lots of layers and groups, and I can't seem to find a specific layer. Let's say that this ellipse is called, I don't know, circle. And this rectangle here is called card. Okay? And if I wanted to quickly find them, I can use the search option. Click here, search for the term that you're looking for, and there we go. It automatically finds it. What about card? It finds it as well. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about layer or shape transformations. Let's say that I have this rectangle here, and I want to change its dimensions, its width, its height. How do I do that? Well, I can use the handles from either side. If I get the corner handle, it resizes both in width and height. If I hold down Shift, it's going to resize proportionally. But I can also flip it. I can flip it horizontally, or I can flip it vertically. And you actually cannot see any change right now. Let me switch to a linear gradient that goes from like here to here. Okay, so if I flip it horizontally, it's going to look like that. If I flip it vertically, it's going to look like that. To rotate an element, I can hover with my mouse cursor over one of the corners until the cursor changes, and I can grab that, rotate it, and I can also hold down Shift to rotate it in increments of 15 degrees, like so. Alternatively, I can also input a new value in the rotation here. Now, something very, very useful is that I can use this inspector to define dimensions or different values for different properties for the selected object. I can change the width, the height, the X and Y position relative to its parent element. In this case, it's the artboard. So if I want to put this right in the corner there, I can change its X to 0 and Y to 0. I can change the width from here. Let's say I want this to be 800 pixels by 300. And something very, very cool is you can now do math calculations in the property inspector. So I can say 800 plus 50, and that's going to automatically do the calculations for me. Or I can say height 300 divided by 2, and that's going to give me 150. Super, super helpful feature, especially when you have large numbers and you have some pretty complex calculations to do. That's easy peasy for or with this new feature. And finally, another way to transform or position an object on your canvas is to use the keyboard shortcuts. You can use the left and right arrows to nudge elements into place, 1 pixel at a time, or you can hold down Shift and do 10 pixels at a time. And you can use up and down to nudge it up and down, and you can also hold down Shift to nudge it 10 pixels at a time. And then you can hold down Alt and use left, right, or top, down to change its width and height respectively. And you can also hold down Shift to do that in increments of 10 pixels. So with this technique, it's really easy to quickly change the size of an object to a desired size. So let's say, for example, that I want this rectangle to be 500 pixels in width. It's 468 now, so I'm going to do Alt, right to get it to 470, and then I'm going to hold down Shift, 1, 2, 3, and I got it to the exact size that I wanted. And that concludes this rather lengthy lesson on working with lines and shapes. As I was saying previously, these alongside the text tool are hugely important. So why don't we cover the text tool in the next lesson? I'll see you there. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to work with text elements in Adobe XD. And this is very important because text is found in every single design project you'll be creating. So let's begin. To add a text element, you can select the text tool or press T on your keyboard, and then just click anywhere in your canvas or in your artboard and start typing your text. Now, with this selected, the inspector panel now gives us a new section or a new collection of properties we can change. First, we can select the font family or the typeface that we're going to use, and we can simply select one from this list here. We can change the font size. We can change the font weight and also the font style if we want italic or not. Then we have access to the character spacing, to line spacing, and also to paragraph spacing. So let's explain these last two elements a little bit. For that, let's create a text box. So to create one, choose the text tool again and click and drag to create a box that will contain your text. As you can see, the text wraps up nicely within the bounds of my text box. With this selected, I can grab any of these handles to make it bigger or smaller. All right, now back to the properties. The line spacing will basically affect the line between each line of text. The distance, between each line of text. So right now it's at 86, but if I go to like 120, you'll see that my text lines are spaced a lot more. Paragraph spacing defines the space between paragraphs. So if I'm gonna bring this back to 90 and I'm gonna add a paragraph here with the Enter key, I'm gonna resize this a little bit. You'll see that when I change this value, let's say for example 30, this new paragraph that I created is shifted down. And this can increase by whatever value we want. So these are two different things. This affects the spacing between the individual lines of text, and this affects the spacing between paragraphs. And a paragraph is when you hit Enter and you create a new line of text. Now, apart from these properties, we can also affect the alignment of the text. So this is left align, here is center, here is right. And the following two options refer to how text is defined. Is it defined like I did here at first as just a single line, and this is called point text, or is it defined as a text box? And in XD, this is called area text. At any point, I can change the type between point text and area text. So if I select this and I say convert this to point text, it's just going to create multiple lines. But if I take this and I define it as area text, I can then add new content to this. So that's the difference between these two elements. Now, the area text is suitable, of course, for paragraphs and long text. The point text, is more suitable for example, the text on a button or the text on a menu item, right? Something that doesn't need multiple lines. And using a point text also has a nifty feature here. If you drag this handle, it's gonna change the font size and also the line height or the line spacing. So as you can see, that changes automatically. So that is fantastic. Now, a recent addition to Adobe XD is the ability to add superscript and subscript. You can find these two options here. So if I'm gonna say the word new and select it, I can select superscript and it's going to be displayed like this, or I can select subscript and it's going to be displayed like this at the bottom. We can also change the text decoration by adding underline. We can also choose strike through, and we can also choose the letter case for the text element we selected. We can choose between uppercase, lowercase, and also title case. So those are the text properties you can change. Now, because this is an object, we also have access to some other properties, like for example, the opacity, just like we would on a normal shape. We can add a solid fill color to it. And this is actually how you change the color of a text. We can add a border, and this will be applied to each individual letter. And we can also add a shadow and a background blur. All right, and those are the basics of working with the text tool in Adobe XD. Now, let's move on and learn how to work with images. That's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to work with images in Adobe XD. We'll be importing them, scaling them, masking them with different shapes, and also opening up a couple of vectors from CC libraries. So let's begin. To import an image in Adobe XD, we'll go to the File menu. If you're using Windows, you can find it here. If you're using Mac OS, you'll find it in the top bar in your operating system. So because I'm using Windows, I'm gonna click this button here, Import. And I went ahead and downloaded some images from Unsplash. So let's select the first one, Import. And now I have the image here. A new layer was created, and it was named after the original file name of the image. But as you can see, it's a little bit too big for my artboard. So let's see how we can resize it or scale it. Pretty easy task. Simply grab one of the corners. And if you want to scale this proportionally, hold down Shift and scale it until it it fits your artboard or it gets to the desired size. This behaves just like a rectangle. For example, I can round off its corners. I can make it bigger and smaller. And if for some reason I want to scale it without a proportion, so I want to scale the width separately from its height, all I got to do is uncheck lock aspect. So now I can do something like this or something like this, and you'll see that the width or the height are being changed separately from one another. Now, this might be worth doing on a simple rectangle, but on an image, I always recommend that you keep on lock aspect because it's just gonna resize your image proportionally. With an image, you can always flip it. So this is horizontally, this is vertically. And you can change its opacity. If you want, you can add a fill color to it, either a solid color or one of the two gradients. But if you do that, it's just going to be another shape with a fill color. The details of the image will be lost. You can add a border to it, shadow, background blur. And since we're dealing with images, let me show you what background blur is doing, because this is where you see it best. And let's also draw a shape on top of this to about the halfway point, like that. So with the shape selected, and make sure the shape is above my image, I'm going to select it, and then I'll go and add background blur. So this takes anything that's behind or under the shape and blurs it. And you can control this. You can control the amount of blur. You can control the brightness. And you can control the opacity. So by doing this, it's really easy to create, for example, a frosted glass effect over the selected image. Now, instead of background blur, you can also use object blur. Simply click on this little icon here, select object blur, and this will instead blur the object itself and not, what's behind it or whatever. And again, here you have the option to choose the amount of blur that you want to add to that object. Cool. Now the final option here is mark for export. This is checked by default when you're importing an image, because XD assumes that, okay, anything that's an image will be exported later on for, when you're coding the actual project. So when you're importing the image, this will be checked by default. For example, if I were to add a normal shape here, you'll see that this check mark is not checked by default. All right, so that's how you can import an image in XD using File and then going to Import. But there's a simpler way, and that is to just drag and drop. So here I have my Explorer opened in Windows. I selected an image, and let me actually bring this over. So I selected an image, and I can simply drag and drop, and it's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to bring in my image, which you can then resize to match your project. Now, in the beginning of this video, I mentioned masking an image with a given shape. So let's see how we can do that. It's actually a very simple process. Let's say that I want to create a circle, and this image will be kind of contained within that circle. So grab the ellipse tool, hold Shift, click and drag. let's set it out that I just want to capture this motorcycle in here. Something like that. So now, with these two elements selected, I would right-click, and I would say mask with shape. Let me see if I can bring this even further up. So mask with shape, or Shift, Control, or Command M. Okay, so now this created a mask group, and our image is now contained within that group. The beauty of this is that I can always go back either by double-clicking this or by clicking this icon, and I can make the ellipse bigger or smaller. I can change its properties, and I can also select the image and move it around. So I can do something like this, for example. Very cool. But now the mask group is an object in itself, and I can change its properties. I can move it around. I can change its opacity. I can add a fill to it if I want, although nothing is going to happen. And I can also add a border to it. Now I can create any shape that I want. It doesn't have to be an ellipse. So for example, I can delete the ellipse, and I can grab the pen tool and I can create a shape like this. Notice that when I deleted that ellipse, this turned from a mask group to a simple group. To enable masking again, I can simply select both of these again, right-click, mask with shape. And then I can right-click here and say ungroup. So all I'm left right now is the original mask group. And again, just like with the ellipse, I can go in, I can move the image, I can select the path, I can change its shape here. And of course, I can edit the mask as well. Just like we did in the previous lesson when we were working with the pen tool. And now we're back with the mask group. Now, a relatively new feature that was added to XD is called blend modes. So let me quickly bring in another image. And here in the inspector, we can see a drop-down called blend mode. Right now it's set to normal, but we can set it to darken, multiply, color burn, lighten, screen, color dodge. We have a lot of them. If you've ever done some image editing in Photoshop, then you would be very familiar with these elements. So applying a blend mode directly to the image, in most cases, it's not going to do much. A blend mode works when 2 or more layers are involved. So for example, I can grab the rectangle tool, I can draw a simple shape here, and I can choose as a fill, let's go with this blue color, and then I can select it, and I can choose the blend mode to darken, and you can see that whatever is behind it now kind of blends in with the color. Then multiply does something different, color burn has a different effect, lighten has a different effect. Overlay, you'll probably use this a lot because it's a great way to create a color overlay for an image. Very nice. So you can choose these and do, soft edits on the image. This is not as powerful as Photoshop, but it's not meant to be. Photoshop is a dedicated image editor, while XD is not. It has a totally different purpose. But it's nice to have these elements here, or these options here in XD, so that you can do some of these quick image edits. Now, in the beginning of this lesson, I mentioned that we're going to load some vectors from CC libraries or Adobe CC libraries. And CC libraries is basically a place where you can store assets and then use them across all Adobe products. Like, for example, you can create graphics in Photoshop or Illustrator and then have access to those graphics in other apps such as Premiere Pro or, in this case, XD. So to access CC libraries, you will need to go to Assets, and we'll talk more about assets in a future lesson, but for now, we can go in here, click this button where it says Open CC Libraries, or we can go into the File menu and we can select Open CC Libraries from here, or use Shift Control or Command L. And this does the same thing. It opens up this, this panel that you can move around, and you can choose the library from this drop down. And here I have a couple of assets saved a while back when I worked on a project in Illustrator. I have some colors saved up and also some graphics. I have some vectors here and also some images. So with these images, I can simply click and drag into my canvas. And the same thing goes for the vectors. I can click and drag, and depending on the size of the asset, it's gonna take a little while to download. But once it does, I've now downloaded that asset from CC libraries. This was just a quick look at working with CC libraries, because it kind of pertained to what we're talking about in this lesson, which is images. But we'll cover assets in more depth in a future lesson. And that's how you can work with images in XD. With this lesson complete, you've now learned the basics of working with Adobe XD. I think it's time we turn it up a notch and start getting into the more advanced features of this app. We'll do that in the next lesson with Boolean operations, or more commonly known as combining shapes. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to combine two or more shapes in Adobe XD. This is very useful for when you want to create a more complex shape. And it's possible thanks to 4 methods called Boolean operations. So let's check them out. Just to show you a quick demo, I have just 2 circles here. I can also give them a fill. And to get access to the Boolean operations, you need to select 2 or more shapes. So after selecting these, we can see the 4 operations are as follows: add, subtract, intersect, and exclude overlap. So here's how each of these work. And to demonstrate, I'm going to quickly duplicate these shapes so I can show you the different results. So first is add. Add will basically merge the 2 shapes together. So it's going to merge this with this. And the result is going to be this. So this creates an entirely new shape. And the layer here is named after the operation that we used. We can also see the operation being highlighted here in the inspector. And with this new shape, well, I can do the exact same things I can do with each individual shape. Change its fill, border, size, opacity, and so on. But the nice thing about this is that you can go in and you still have access to the old shapes. So you can move them around make them bigger, smaller. You get the idea. So that's add. The next operation is called subtract. And here's what it's doing. Notice that, let me just group these first. Notice that ellipse 3 is above ellipse 4. And when I select both of these and I do subtract, ellipse 4 is subtracted from ellipse 3. If I do Ctrl Z to go back and I change the order of the layers, so ellipse 3 is now under ellipse 4, and I do the same operation, the result is going to be different. So the idea is, whatever layer or object you have on top will be subtracted by the one that's under it. So in this case, ellipse 4 is subtracted from ellipse 3. And this works with multiple shapes. So for example, if I'm gonna move this like so, and then I'm gonna select all of them and do subtract, you'll notice that the top one, or parts of the top one, were cut off by whatever was under it. So that's what subtraction is doing. And again, you have access to the original shapes and you can edit them at will. If at some point you want to remove this operation, you can simply right-click ungroup and it's gonna take you back to the original shapes, or with it selected, you can click on this button here and it's gonna revert back. All right, now moving on to intersect. And intersect is basically gonna keep the parts of the object that intersect with one another, right? So in my case, they're intersected like this, only this portion here, and that's what we get. I think you can see it better if I open up the original shapes. So only that part there in the middle got saved. And finally, exclude is basically the opposite of intersect. It's gonna keep everything but the parts that are intersecting with one another. So those are the 4 Boolean operations. Now, as I was saying, you can use these to create more complex shapes. For example, you can create a house. Very easily. So let's add a nice fill color to this. Let's remove the borders, add a fill color. The fill color here doesn't matter. And then I can take these shapes, I can unite them. And I think I actually have a slight misalignment here. Yeah. There we go. So let's take this and let's unite them. And then I can take, I don't know, another shape. We'll make a window here and we'll make a door here. And I can take all of these 3 and I can do exclude overlap. Okay, so now I'm only left with this. And then maybe I want to add a chimney. Well, I can do that here. No problem. Select the chimney, select the house, and hit unite. And now I have a house with a chimney. Oops. There we go. All right. So to get to this shape, there were actually several Boolean operations. First, we had a union. then we had an exclusion, and then we had another union. But now I have a much more complex shape that I can work with, and I can customize just like any other shape. Boolean operations are extremely helpful when creating icons, for example. All right, and those are the 4 Boolean operations you can use to create custom shapes in Adobe XD: add, subtract, intersect, and exclude. Now, with this out of the way, let's learn about aligning layers, okay? Because XD has some amazing built-in smart guides and features that will assist you with aligning different objects on your canvas. We'll learn more about those in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn about aligning objects. Now, XD has some very smart guides that are always there to help you align things when you're moving objects around the canvas. But there are also some on-demand tools that can get the job done. So let's check these out. To demonstrate this, let's grab a rectangle and a circle. Now, let's say that I want to move this rectangle so that it's aligning with this circle. Well, you'll notice that as I start to move it, see right now, we have that cyan line on the top of the rectangle and at the top of the circle telling me that these 2 elements are now perfectly aligned at the top. If I move it further down, you'll notice the same line that passes through their midpoints now tells me that they're perfectly aligned in the center. And if I move it down, it's going to be the same story with the bottom part. So these are some smart guides that you can always use to align various objects in XD. Now, this works horizontally like this, but it also works vertically, right? So now these 2 circles are perfectly aligned vertically like this. And it also works with the left side and the right side. Now, if I want to do this manually, I can select the objects that I want to align, and I can use the alignment tools that I have here. For example, if I want to align all of these at the top, I would select this, or in the middle, or at the bottom. Or if I want to do it the other way around, I can use these controls: align left, align center, align right. I can also distribute elements evenly, regardless of their alignment. So if I want the exact same distance between these 3 elements, I can select them, and I can choose this option, which is called distribute vertically. So now this layer, or this object, sits at 126 pixels from the object above it and 126 from the object below it. The same thing goes when I want to align them like this, horizontally. I can choose this option, distribute horizontally. And that's gonna create equal distance between this and this, and from this to this. Well, almost equal. In some cases, to create an equal distance would mean creating subpixels. And in this case, XD chooses to create, in this example, 87 here and 88 here. It's not a big deal. Now, you can also distribute elements evenly when you move them around. For example, I can put this here at 100 pixels, and then when I move this, see, XD automatically displays these pink guides telling me that, hey, you have 100 pixels between green and blue as well. just like you have between blue and red. That's a quick way of distributing elements, and it works vertically too. See, 66 and 66. How easy is that? Now, previously you saw me use a feature that I absolutely love in XD, and that's the ability to display these guides along with measurements. So if you select an object and you hold down the Alt key, it's going to show you the distance between the edges of the object and the edges of whatever object you're hovering on. So in my case, it's the artboard. But I can move my cursor to this circle, okay? And it's going to tell me that, okay, I have 90 pixel distance between this edge and this edge, and I have 15 pixel distance that you can see here between the top edge of this and the bottom edge of my selected object. Here's another example here. And let me move these around. So you can see the difference. Pretty cool, right? Now, notice that these guides will appear by themselves when these objects are aligned in some way. So if I have my object here, no guides. As soon as I align one of the edges, look, I can see the guides. Same goes for center. Same goes for the right side. This also works brilliantly well when you're moving an object with your keyboard. So remember the keyboard shortcuts I told you about in a previous lesson? The ones about nudging an element up and down while holding down Shift allows me to move an object up and down. And because of these guides, I can see exactly where it is and the amount I need to move it to position it where I want. Fantastic feature. And that's how you can align objects. Now, one of the biggest features in XD is assets. In assets, you can save colors, you can save character style, and you can save components, which you can then reuse later on across your entire project. So let's learn more about how to work with assets in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you're going to learn how to work with assets in Adobe XD. These are reusable bits of your project, and they're categorized in colors, character styles, and components. So let's see how you can use them to your advantage. To find the assets in your current project, you need to go down here on the left side and switch between layers or plugins, it depends on what you have, to assets, or you can press Shift, Control, or Command Y. And here you'll find colors, character styles, and components. So how do you create an asset? Well, let's create a rectangle, for example. Let's set a color to something like this. Now, when I have this selected, notice that two of my assets became active, colors and components. That means with this selected, I can create an asset in either of these two categories. So if I click on colors, it tells me add color from selection. So that took the fill color and the border color, and it created two assets for me. I can also create a component. Click, and now this is named component 1. Notice the transform controls have changed color. So this is how they look like on a normal layer. They're blue, but on a component, they are green. Now, if I were to add a bit of text, let's make this a little bit bigger. I can also create a character style and a component. So I'm going to click this character style, and it tells me I have a new asset. It gives me the font family. It gives me the font size. And also if I hover on it, it also tells me the character spacing and line spacing, which is great. So now I have these assets. What can I do with them? Well, it's very simple. If I have, for example, another artboard, okay, and I want to use this component 1 that I just created, what I can simply do is just drag and drop to my other artboards. And here's the cool part. If I change the color of this element, all the other instances of that component change as well. We'll talk more about components in the next lesson. For now, I just wanted to give you a quick demo of what you can do with assets. Now, what about character styles? Same thing. Let's say I have another piece of text, and let's say I want to make it look exactly like this one here. Well, I can select it and I can click on the character style that I want to use. So now I can select this character style and I can right-click, edit, and I can change its properties. So let's say I want 40 pixels font size. Maybe I want a different color. Okay, so any element that has that character style gets updated automatically. If I select these elements and I do changes individually, they only affect that element. It doesn't affect the actual character style. What about colors? Well, with colors, it's the same thing. Let's say I have multiple elements, not necessarily components, okay, that are using this color. And at some point I decide, okay, I don't like this shade anymore. I want to change it. But I also want to change it on all the elements that are using it. That's really easy to do. Right-click on this color, edit, and I can change it on all the places at once, which is fantastic. Now, with assets, you can do a couple different things. First, you can search for a specific asset, for example, component, and it just highlights that particular asset. Very useful when you have a big list of assets to work with. And you can also search by type. So you can choose between colors, character styles, and components. You can also rename these. So I can double click any of these. And in the case of colors, for example, instead of the hex code, I can say, I don't know, primary. I can say gray. Character styles, instead of this default text that it gives me, I can say heading 1. I can select this one, create a new style, and I can call it heading 2. I can also rearrange these assets by simply click, drag, and drop in its new position. It's very easy. And of course, renaming works the same for components. One very particular feature is called highlighting assets. So, for example, I can right-click on a color and I can say highlight on canvas. And that's going to highlight every single element that's using that color. I can also highlight this one. Pretty cool. What about character styles? Same thing, highlight on canvas, and it tells me, okay, this element is using this character style. And you can see this is highlighted and this is highlighted. Same goes for components. What components or what elements on my canvas are using this component? This, and this. Very cool. Really easy to find specific elements like this. Now, there is another view mode here. There's a grid view, or you can switch back to a list view. Personally, I like this a lot more, but it depends on your preference. Right here, you can find access to the CC libraries I showed you previously. And here, you have the option to link assets. So what is this thing? Well, it's actually very cool. You see, you can link assets from another document. So let's say that I have this document. It's called doc1. It's saved in the cloud. Now let's go ahead and create a new document here in XD. And I'm going to link assets. And I'm going to select doc1. So by doing that, I now have access to all of the assets that were saved in doc1, right? I can always go back to this and see my original assets. And this is my new document. So I can, for example, grab the square and notice that we have a different icon here on this asset. And we have a different icon here as well. It's a kind of a link icon. This tells me that these assets are linked to another document. If we go back to our original document, you can see that none of these have that linked icon. So how does this help me? Well, it's very useful. For example, if you're changing the original assets and you give it a save, and then you jump back to your new document, it tells me, okay, linked asset update is available. You'll also see a little icon here highlighted telling you that, hey, you have an update available. And if you hover over it, you'll see the new version. This is the old version. This is the new version. So you can click here to update it. Or if you have multiple updates, let's, for example, change the font families on these two elements. Save. And now when I go back, it tells me that I have two updates. And again, it shows me here which assets I need to update. So I can click this button, and now I have the updated styles applied. With linked assets, you can basically create your own pattern libraries, keep them in the cloud, and you can reference them anytime in new documents. And when you want to change something, you basically change the original file. In my case, it's this one. And then all of the changes that you make here will be propagated to all the documents that use these linked assets. And that's how you can create and work with assets in Adobe XD. Now, one of these assets is represented by components. I briefly mentioned components in this lesson, but they are a bit more complex. So let's talk more about them in the next lesson. See you there. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to work with components in Adobe XD. And as I was saying in the previous lesson, these are a part of the assets you can use in XD. And a component is basically an object or a group of objects you can reuse across your document. So let's see how to create and manage these components. And I'm going to give you a very simple example here, but one that I think would be applicable to everyone. And that is a button, right? Buttons are perfect for being transformed into components because you would use buttons in a lot of pages or in a lot of places in your project, and they all have the same style, right? They can have different text, but the overall style is the same. So we're going to start with a very simple rectangle. Let's make this like 90 and 500. And let's round off the corners completely. Let's add a fill to it, maybe something like that. Or I can even copy this, excuse me, I can even copy this blue from XD here. All right, so I've created that. Let's add a bit of text inside, and let's say send message. For this, let's go with the white. For the font family, we're gonna leave it like this, and maybe add 36 and maybe a semi-bold, 3% on character spacing, and I think we should be good to go. It's gonna position this in the middle. So now what I can do is select both of these elements and create a component. You can do that in a few different ways. You can right click and select make component. You can use Control or Command K. You can do it here by clicking this button, or you can do it here in the inspector. So loads of ways to create a component. Now, once you do that, that component is added to my asset list. And we now have the master. So when we're talking about components, there are two versions of them. There's a master and there's an instance. So for example, if I were to copy this and paste it, this is now an instance. Okay. Another way you can differentiate between the two is that the master has this green rhombus full on the top left corner. The instance has a hollow rhombus. But also it tells you right here that, hey, this is an instance. So how are these two different? Well, if I make a change to my master, let's actually create another instance. If I make a change to my master, all the instances will be updated. But if I make a change to one of the instances, only that instance is affected. All right. Now, if I go back to my master and I change this again, only the instance that wasn't modified by me gets the update. The other one stays exactly as I set it. But with an instance, I can always right click and I can choose reset to master state. And now it's bound again to my master. So if I make the changes, that changes with it. And visual appearance is not the only thing that changes. So for example, I can change this text here and all of my instances will be updated. But I can change the text here and only this one will be updated. It's the exact same story. These changes that you make to instances are called component overrides, right? So you're basically overriding the original component. Now, to edit the original component, you can double click it and it's gonna enter the edit mode, or you can click on one of its instances and you can click this little button here, which says Edit Master Component, and it's going to go there. Or you can right-click and choose the same thing, Edit Master Component from here, and it goes to the master. As I was saying, you can use these instances all over the place in your entire document. It doesn't matter how many artboards you have, you can use it everywhere. And you can also use it as a shared asset. Just like I showed you in the previous lesson, if I now create a new file and I link this doc1, I now have access to that asset. And any change that I make to this will be reflected in the other document. So it works just like any other asset. Now, the component overrides don't just refer to the contents, right? You can also change the size of an instance, right? So I can select this, I can make it longer, shorter, without actually affecting the actual master element. If I'm gonna reset this to the master state, and this as well, then any change I make to the size will be reflected here as well. You can have nested components. That means a component inside another component. And to demonstrate, I'm just going to add a couple of images that I downloaded. You can find the link to the icon set in the lesson notes. So what I'm going to do is select each one, create a component. Okay, I'm actually going to use the shortcut here, Control K. So now all of these are components. And let's say that I'm going to edit this master component, and I'm going to add an icon inside it. Let's make this bigger, and let's place it like so. Now, I can very easily swap this icon with another one simply by dragging and dropping in the new icon. So I'm going to enter edit mode here, drag, and drop. And now I've changed this to a new icon. I can even replace entire components with different ones. So if instead of this button, I want to use the album here, I can do that. Click, drag, release, and now I have another instance, okay, of this master component. And finally, what I want to show you regarding components is component states. Now, this is a very, very handy feature. Let's say that we have this button. Let's make it a little bit shorter. And let's say that we have a fill color, something like that. This is the default state, okay? But I can add a hover state or a new state of my choosing. So a hover state, I can give it my own name if I want to, allows me to make changes to it. Like let's say I want a darker color when I hover on it. And then I can always switch between these. Very helpful in development when you have a button like this and you're wondering, okay, how does this look when it's hovered on? Well, here's the default and here's the hover, right? No need to create a copy of it for a different state. And you can even go ahead and create as many states as you want. Let's do a pressed state where, you know, I can make this black or something. So now I have a button with 3 states. This is the default, this is the hover, and this is pressed. And by the way, this works with any component. I can I don't know, this icon. It has a default state, but what if I want a light state where it doesn't have this black color? Let's make it blue, and instead of light state, let's do colored. And of course, I can always switch between the two. Very cool. And that's it for components. I think this is one of the most important tools you can use because it just saves you a bunch of time. And you can use it on so many different things. I give you an example here for a button, but you can make like a menu bar into a component. Basically, you think about the elements or the object that you're repeating over and over. Let's say you have a website, you're designing a website in XD, and the menu bar repeats in every single page, or the footer repeats in every single page. Well, you create components for these, and you add those instances or instances of those components to all of the pages that you want. And in the future, if you want to make a change, you just change the master component, and all of those modifications will be applied to all of the instances. Therefore, saving you time, a lot of time. So yeah, components, definitely a feature that's worth using. Now, let's continue our exploration of Adobe XD's more advanced features. And in the next lesson, we'll cover something called the repeat grid. So I'll see you there. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn about the repeat grid. This is a unique feature to XD in the sense that I haven't seen it being implemented in any other software of this nature. So let's jump right in and see what we can do with it. Let's assume that we need to build like a gallery. Okay, so I'm gonna just quickly, apply some styles here, and I'm gonna create like a card element here, maybe round off the corners a little bit, and maybe add a little bit of a shadow. And then let's go ahead and import one of these pictures, and let's create another rectangle that goes on the bottom side, and I'm gonna round off the bottom corners as well. So this is top left, top right. I'm gonna do 13 here, 13 here, and I'm gonna do a background blur, something like that. And I'm gonna remove the border. So in here, let's actually decrease the brightness a little bit. Okay, and in here, I'm gonna add a piece of text that says the city. Okay, it doesn't really matter how big this is. Maybe make it a little bit smaller. All right, so that should do it. Let's go ahead and select all of this. Control G to group it. Let's make this artboard a little bit bigger. There we go. And you know what? Let's actually center this. Okay, so now let's say I want to repeat this and create like a grid. Well, I can Control or Command C and then Control or Command V to copy and paste it. I'm going to set it at the correct distance. And then I can do Control D to duplicate it. Control D. And so on and so forth. But the problem is right now, if I want to change the distance between these elements, well, I got to do it manually. I got to change this, and then I got to change this, and this, and this, and so on. Well, a much easier way to make this happen is to use a repeat grid. So the way it works is very simple. You would select an element, click repeat grid, or Control or Command R. And then you use these handles to define how big your grid should be. Mine should stop right about here. And I can go this way as well. Now, the beautiful part about this grid is that I can always change the distance between the grid items simultaneously. And notice I have a little indicator here on the top that's telling me the exact amount. In my case, let's go to like, I don't know, 90. It's fine. And I can do this vertically, but also horizontally. If I want no distance, I can just bring it down to 0. But in my case, I'm gonna keep it something like this. And then once you're happy with the changes, right? Let's do this a little bit. Once you're happy with the changes, you can hit Ungroup Grid. And that changes from the repeat grid to just a regular list of groups. That is just fantastic. Let me just get rid of that line there. Okay. Now, the cool part about this is that if I want to change these images all at once, I can simply go in, select a bunch of my images and drag them in. But for that, the repeat grid still needs to be there. Okay, so with the repeat grid selected, I can select my images and I can bring them in. And now I have 5 images, and so the AI here inside XD distributed my images, each one in each instance. Let's actually just collapse this to a single row. And I can do the same for the text. Instead of going in there individually and changing the text, here's what I can do. I can create a new text file. So let me do that right now. I'm going to call this list.txt. And inside, I can say something like this. The city, and let's actually draw some inspiration from the images themselves. I don't know, I think that's a Harley. And make sure you separate these, each row with an enter. Food, I don't know, nice car, and vacation. Okay, so here's my list. And what I can do now is grab this file, drag it in, and see that when I hover, let me actually zoom in here a little bit. When I hover over the repeat grid, the text gets highlighted. So I'm going to drop it in. So now all of my items are changing. Here's the city, here's Harley, food, nice car, vacation. It doesn't really matter that they're out of order. You can go back into your text document and you can reorder them here. So Harley would be first, then it would be food, then it would be nice car, vacation, and then the city. So now do the same thing, lists, and now they're in the correct order. Harley, food, nice car, vacation, and the city. And now if you're happy with the changes, you can go ahead and ungroup the grid, but usually I just leave it on because it allows me to make further changes to it without much hassle. All right, and that's how you can work with repeat grids. A very handy feature if you ask me, and definitely a time saver. Now, in the next lesson, we're gonna learn how to create responsive layouts in XD using a feature called responsive resize. So I'll see you there. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to create responsive layouts in Adobe XD. And this is totally doable thanks to a feature called responsive resize. Now, Traditionally, to achieve this responsive-like behavior, you would need to manually set constraints to certain objects so that to the parent element of certain objects, so that when that parent is resized, those objects are resized and repositioned accordingly. And this can be time consuming. Well, XD will now do this automatically for you. It will analyze the selected objects, how they're grouped, how they're positioned, and will apply these constraints automatically for you so that you can achieve that responsive-like behavior. So let's go ahead and see this in action. To demo this, I'm going to create a very, very basic example. I'm going to quickly mock up what can be a button. So let's properly align these. And let's group them up. And let's also give this a nice fill. Get rid of the border, and let's make this text white. Okay, so now you have like a typical button, okay? So watch what happens when I resize this. See how the text always stays in the center and only the background resizes? This is exactly what you want. And this is possible because I have responsive resize on. So if I disable this, you'll notice that when I resize this object, the text scales as well. And that's definitely something that we do not want. But when I'm enabling responsive resize and I set it to auto, everything works as it should. So let's analyze this a little bit and see exactly how it works. So if we go and select the text and we enable the manual constraint, you'll see that this element has a fixed width and a fixed height. So that means when I resize its parent, which is this group, that text element doesn't change its size. It stays exactly the same. If we're going to select the background here and we switch this to manual, you'll see that the constraints here now look different. It's fixed on all 4 directions. So that's a great use case for responsive resize on a simple element. But here we're talking about responsive layouts. So that means that when I resize, for example, this artboard, I need to know how this button will behave. So what I'm going to do is enable responsive resize on the actual artboard. And you'll see that when I resize it now, the button kind of moves with it, but it doesn't change its size. Now I can change this behavior. So let's select this. We'll switch to manual constraints. And if I uncheck fixed width, you'll see that when I resize my artboard, the button resizes with it. I can also affect its position. So I can say, okay, fix left. So that means that when I resize the artboard, the button's parent element, the button is now fixed in this position. It kind of clings on to this left edge here because this is what I set in the constraints. And you can also see a pink line. You saw that? That's an indicator telling you that, okay, we have a constraint to the left edge here of its parent element. I can also do this, fix right. So now when I resize the parent, notice that the button stays in the same position relative to this right-hand side edge. Same goes for top bottom. If I want it to be fixed on the top, I would select this bit. So now the button stays there. And notice the pink lines now show me the constraints for this element. Now, let's look at a more practical example. Let's say that on this page, I have a top bar, which I'm going to illustrate with a simple rectangle that I'm going to put right here. And just for the sake of the demo, let's give that a nice color and remove the border. Now, inside this, I'm going to add a piece of text here. This is for the logo. And I'm going to add another piece of text here. This is for the menu items. And let's group all of this like so. So now, you'll notice that because I have a responsive resize set automatically for me, XD is doing all the work. When I resize this bit, you'll see that the logo stays in its place. The menu items kind of move with my artboard here, and the background resizes accordingly. And I can go the other way as well. Also, you'll see that when I resize the artboard like this, that menu bar now stays in place, even if I resize it from the top, because if we look at the constraints, it's now set to left, to right, and to the top. And XD did this automatically for me. It calculated the position of the elements, how it's grouped, how these elements are positioned inside this main group, and it automatically applied the correct constraints for me, which is fantastic. Now, if at some point you decide that things are not resizing accordingly, you can always go in. You can select the elements that don't behave properly. You can switch to manual mode, and you can then edit the constraints here yourself. Also, if for some reason you don't want responsive resize to be applied temporarily, you can use Shift and resize an element. And as you can see here, this scales, but responsive resize is temporarily disabled. Okay, if I let go of Shift and I resize this the same way, now it takes into consideration the constraints that are applied to the elements. So this is a very useful feature in XD because you might be, designing a web page on a large artboard like this, and then you would say, okay, well, let's see how this would look like on mobile, right? So you would duplicate that, and if everything is set correctly, all you have to do is simply just resize it, and everything will fall into place nicely. Without this feature, it would be a process that looks something like this. So let's say that I'm disabling responsive resize. So I'm going to select the artboard. I'm going to disable it here as well. So I'm going to resize this. And then I got to select this bit, resize it as well. I got to bring in the menu items here. So it's a multi-step process without this option enabled. And if you have a big page, then you have to do these changes manually for every single element on that page. But with responsive resize, it's just super, super easy. Now, with that said, you should know that this is not a magic solution to everything. For example, if you have let's say a grid layout, okay, and you're adding some elements to these columns. Let's say you have 3 elements here, and you want to create the mobile version. So on mobile version, these elements will be stacked. Okay, well, XD doesn't do that for you. So if you just resize it like this, you'll see that these elements are kind of getting resized as well. So there are some things that responsive resize cannot do for you. In this instance, I would have to make this a little bit bigger. And oh look, here's actually a great example of one constraint that wasn't applied correctly. So you saw when I resized this vertically, these elements were pushed down, and I don't want that. So I'm gonna select them, go to manual, and I'm gonna set fix top. So now when I resize this bit, they'll stay in their correct position. So now what you need to do is manually grab these and position them the way you see fit for a mobile experience. And look, we also have a different problem here. Because of the way they were grouped, each of these elements has different constraints. So this one, for example, has top left. This one has top left and right. This one has top and right. So to fix this, you would need to select each one individually and do it like so. And this one also has a fixed width, just like the others. So now you can resize the artboard correctly. So not a perfect solution, but a very good one nonetheless, because it does save you a bunch of time on most layouts. And that's how you can create responsive layouts in Adobe XD. Now, coming up in the next lesson, we'll talk about plugins. These are add-ons that extend the original functionality of XD. We'll see you in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to use plugins in Adobe XD. And plugins are basically add-ons you can install, and they offer additional functionality or features that are not native to XD. So let's check them out. To open the plugins page, you can go to the Start menu, Add-ons, or from the main interface, you can click on this little button here. This is going to take you to the plugins page, and you can hit Discover Plugins. And it's going to take you to this page here that recommends certain plugins, like, for example, UI faces. You can also browse through the various categories. You can search for a specific plugin, and you can also manage the plugins that you have installed. So let's go ahead and install one of these plugins, UI Faces, for example. Now that's installed, I can close this window and notice that I have a new plugin here. The way to use this plugin, if I remember correctly, it's very simple. You just create a shape, you select it, and then you click on the plugin. You can choose from the various options that you have here, like where do you want to get the images from. You can select the age, gender, emotion, and so on, and you just hit apply. Do you want to redo it? You just hit apply again. And if that doesn't work for you, you can tamper with the filters here, and you would just hit apply again until you get to the result that you want. So this is just one of the examples. Other plugins will work differently, of course. So let's go back and let's add another plugin, like, for example, this lorem ipsum, which will insert placeholder text. So let's create a text area, go here, fill with placeholder text. Then you select the various options that you want. And those are just two examples of working with plugins. I highly recommend you open up this plugin page. There are lots and lots of plugins you can choose from. So just find the ones that suit your workflow and help you get stuff done faster. Now, XD is an app you can use for designing websites, apps, icons, and more. And at some point, you'll have to export some images, right? We'll learn how to do that in XD in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to export assets and artboards from Adobe XD. We'll also touch on exporting to third-party apps like Avocode, Zeppelin, and ProtoPie. So let's begin. Right here, I've loaded a UI kit called the Fresh Food UI Kit. I got this for free from the Adobe XD official page. You just go to this address, UI Kits, and it's this one right here by Daniel White. So you can grab the kit for free from that address. And let's say that I want to export some images and some artboards. Well, this is actually super easy to do. To export an artboard, you would simply select it and then go to the menu item, export, select it, or you can press Control or Command E depending on your operating system. So do that. You can choose the format, PNG, SVG, PDF, or JPEG. Let's choose a JPEG. You can choose the quality. What are you exporting for? If you export for the web, you have the option to choose whether these were designed at 1x ratio, 2x ratio. Design is just 1x ratio, so that's how they'll be exported. And then you would select the destination folder, and then you would hit export. And just like that, we now have a JPEG file with the exact contents of this artboard, and it's even named the same as my artboard. Now, in XD, I can do something really cool. I can go to export without selecting anything. I can go to the file menu, export, and I can export all artboards. Same deal. Choose the export parameters here. Let's also do web, and let's create a new folder here. Call this artboards. Select that, and let's export all of them. And XD is actually pretty fast. It exported all of my artboards in no time. And then you can go through them and notice that it exported a normal version at 1x, but also a 2x version of the same artboard. That was pretty cool. Very, very fast. Now, what about exporting an asset like, for example, this image here? Well, it's exactly the same thing. Go in here, export selected, or use Control or Command E. And if you have multiple items, like for example, these icons, let's select them from here. I can use Control E because I'm on Windows. Let's export these as SVGs. And depending on the format, you have different export options here. Let's hit export. And now you'll see that in my export folder, I have 3 SVG files for those icons that I just exported. Now, what if you don't want to do this for every single asset you have in your project? Because take a look at this UI kit, for example. What if I want to export all of the images from here? Well, just selecting them one by one could be time consuming. So what you can do is actually mark items for export. Okay, so let's take this this page, for example, right? I want to mark a couple of items for export. This X icon, for example, I'm going to select it. I'm going to scroll down in the inspector, and there's a little option here called Mark for Export. So I'm going to click that. What else? Maybe I want this icon. Well, I can do the same thing, or I can right click it and I can choose from here, mark for export, or I can press Shift E. What about these images? Right, I can select these. Again, Shift E. Alternatively, I can also select an element. I can go into the Layers panel, and when I hover on a layer, the very first option is this, mark for export. And I can click this little icon on all the items that I want to mark for export. So once all of this is done, what I can do is go to the File menu, Export, Batch, or Shift Control or Command E. So that will select all of the items that are marked for export, and it's going to bundle them. So let's say I want to export these as PNG files. And let's create a new folder here called Bundle. Export. XD is going to do its thing. And now, let's find that folder. There it is. Now you'll see that all of the items that were marked for export, notice there are several other items already marked for export, but they were all exported as PNGs, including the ones that I selected. So that is batch export. Now, there are other ways to share your assets or your artboards in XD. If you go to the Share tab, you'll see that all of my artboards are selected, and I can choose from View Setting, I can choose Development. I can choose where or for what I want to export these, web, iOS, or Android. Let's choose iOS. I can mark all of the assets as downloadable, so the ones that are marked for export will be downloadable. And then I can create a link. All right, and the link is now created. So let's go ahead and copy it. And when we open this link, it's going to take us to this page where we can see all of the artboards. We can comment on them, and we can go into this mode. And here we can see all of the assets, so all of the images, all of the colors that are being used, all of the character styles, all of the interactions. These are for prototyping. But to copy any of these, you just click, and now you just copy the color. You can click on this orange. You can choose the format, and you can download it if you want. So this is another way to share assets with other people, with developers or with members of your team. Finally, I want to quickly talk about exporting assets to third-party apps like Zeppelin, Avocode, or ProtoPie. You see, XD can export to these apps very easily. You just need to have XD and those apps installed on your system, like I do here. Here's Zeppelin, here's Avocode, and all you have to do is go to Export, and you can choose one of these. Let's say Avocode, for example. So depending on how large your XD files are, it's going to take a while. But once everything is loaded, you can double-click one of the items, and then you can inspect your design files. And this is what Avocode is doing. Zeppelin, they both do the same thing. They allow you to inspect design files. So for example, you can select one of these elements, and you can see, okay, how it's positioned, what size it has. It gives you some CSS styles for it. You can even export assets. Like, for example, I can grab this icon and I can export it from here. I even have the original layer structure. Same thing goes for Zeppelin. You'll go export Zeppelin. You first need to create a project for this. So let's do that again. Right, you would select our project, hit export. You choose the size that you want to export these at, and you actually have to export. You actually have to select some artboards. So let's actually select these three and export to Zeppelin. And just like that, you can now access these files in Zeppelin. And you can do the same thing. You can inspect them, have a look at the colors that are being used, at sizes, and so on and so forth. ProtoPie is another third-party app you can use with Zeppelin. I meant with Adobe XD, excuse me. And ProtoPie is a great app for creating very high-fidelity prototypes. And we actually have a course on that. Make sure you check out the lesson notes. You'll see all the instructions in that course of working with XD and ProtoPie. And that's how you can export XD assets to images or third-party apps. Now, let's move on to the final chapter of this course, which is dedicated entirely to prototyping. And in the next lesson, you'll learn how to create and share prototypes. So I'll see you there. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to create and share prototypes in Adobe XD. This is a very powerful feature that allows you to visualize how users can experience your website or your app. So let's begin. Right here, I have a couple of artboards that I grabbed from the UI kit I showed you previously. And we're going to simulate how this app would work by using the prototype feature. So to enter it, simply switch on to the prototyping tab. And the very first thing you would want to do is set your home screen. So that's the screen that opens up first when you're previewing your prototype. So we're going to start with this. You can set the home screen by selecting an artboard and just clicking this little button here. Really easy. If you decide you want to use another screen, just select a different one, and that's going to update automatically. So now, let's say that when I click this link, I want to go to this screen, right? So what I'm going to do is drag a wire from this element to this screen. And in the inspector, I can choose the trigger. So when I tap this link, it's going to open up this, this screen. And I can choose the action. In most cases, when prototyping, you would use a transition, but you can also use Auto-Animate. More about this in the next lesson. So let's choose transition. Here, the destination is the actual screen that you're going to. And you can choose what kind of animation you want to use. By default, it's set to dissolve, but you can choose a slide or a push. So let's stick with dissolve for now. You can choose the easing, duration, and so on. So now, when you preview your prototype, notice that when I tap on Create Account, it takes me to this bit. And then I can go into Create Account. I can choose this element, and I can click and drag back to sign in. And again, I can choose the trigger as tap, transition, animation. I can do another one, for example, slide left. And now Create Account. And when I click X, it just takes me back to sign in. And I can then do the same for the other screens. Let's say that when I completely filled in the information here and I tap on the Create Account button, that's going to take me to this screen. And then skip here is going to take me to this screen. And then this will take me to this screen. Right? So now my prototype looks something like this. Create account, create it, skip, skip, and I'm at the final screen. And that's how prototyping works at the most basic level. You set up some triggers and some actions. Now, if you want to delete a wire or a link between two screens, it's really simple. Just select the screen that has the start of the wire. You just select it and just hit delete. And that's it. If you want to do it again, just click and drag towards the screen that you want to go to. Or alternatively, select the element, click on this blue arrow, and now you can choose a destination from this list. In my case, create account dark, and the wire will automatically go to that place. XD also has a nice feature for when you want to go back. So instead of specifying a destination here, on the action, you can just say previous artboard. And now, when I click this, it's just going to go to the previous artboard, which in my case, it's sign in. Now, to preview the prototypes, you can do it right here on the desktop using desktop preview. And you can even record them using this functionality here. And you can also preview these interactions, these prototypes on a device. So on mobile preview, you can just click this. It works on both iOS and Android. And on Android, you can download the XD mobile app. On iOS, you can connect your iPhone via USB to your computer, and you need to use the latest version of iTunes. Now, there are some extra features that I want to quickly mention when it comes to prototyping in XD. The transition that you saw me use is just one example of an interaction. You can also do a timed transition. So for example, I added this splash screen artboard here. And what I want to do is I want to create a timed transition so that after a set duration, we go from this screen to this screen. So to do that, I can select this artboard. Let's make it a home screen. And I can click on this little plus sign that says add interaction. Instead of tap, I'm going to choose time. And let's say I want to keep this on for 3 seconds. And then I'm going to transition to sign in. So let's see how that's going. So let's preview that. 1, 2, 3, and there it is. That's a timed transition. You can also do very cool things like using voice triggers and speech. So you can enter a voice command here, and when you speak it out loud, and of course you're connected to a microphone, XD will actually recognize that, and it's going to perform the action that you tell it to. If you want a more detailed tutorial on that, and also on speech, please check out the lesson notes. I've linked to an older tutorial that I made on the topic where I go a lot more in-depth on the subject. But for now, know that you can add time transitions and also voice triggers and speech to Adobe XD prototypes. And finally, before we wrap it up, I just want to quickly mention that when you share your prototypes, you can password protect them. So whoever gets a hold of this link will have to enter a password to view that prototype. There we go. And that's how you can create and share prototypes in Adobe XD. Now, to end this course properly, I'm going to show you one of the best features in Adobe XD, which is Auto-Animate. That's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back to the course. In this lesson, you'll learn how to use the Auto-Animate function in Adobe XD. With this, you can create some very immersive animations for your content between the project screens. So when you're prototyping and you're switching from one screen to the other, any element that's present in both screens will be nicely animated. So let me jump in XD and show you a very simple example. Before we do that though, actually let me show you this. If you want to learn more about Auto-Animate, because you can do so much with it, XD actually has, or Adobe actually has some great documentation on it. You can go to this address here. It's also going to be linked in the lesson notes. And you also have some examples and sample files you can play around with. And you can also check out, and I highly recommend this, the Beginner to Advanced with Adobe XD Auto-Animate course by Daniel White. It's a short course. Whenever you have half an hour to spare, it's also a free course. So Daniel really goes in depth here and shows you exactly how to work with Auto-Animate. I'm just going to quickly glance over this functionality and show you a very simple example. So let's say that I want to make my prototype so that I go from this screen to this screen when I tap on the broccoli. And I want a nice animation for the actual broccoli image. So when I tap on it, it expands to this screen. Okay. So if I do a simple, transition from this to this, and make sure we choose tap here, the result is very simple. It just flips the page and takes me here. However, if instead of the transition action, I choose Auto-Animate, well, that changes things a little bit. And let's also do a transition from this page back to this page, and I'm also going to use that Auto-Animate. So let's see what happens. I tap this. Well, now that's different, isn't it? And it's a lot smoother. It has a much nicer visual impact. The broccoli image gets bigger and it transforms into this final image here. And basically the rest of the elements either fade out or fade in. It really depends on whether or not they are present in the source or destination screens. And to add a little bit more animation to this, here's what we'll do. The way this works is XD will look at the elements between the source screen and destination screen. If the same element is present in both of them, then XD will animate its properties. And those properties include position, size, opacity, color, and so on. If an element is not present, so for example, this search result, it's only present in the source but not here, then it just fades out. This element here, the title, is only present in the destination, not in the source, so it fades in. So to illustrate how Auto-Animate works a little bit better, what I'm going to do is copy this search results. And actually, let's do that in the design stage. I'm going to copy it in this artboard. And actually, I don't think that copied the entire thing, did it? Okay, so let's actually do this, 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 and this. And let's group it up. So now let's copy this. Let's actually call this search results, copy it, and I'm going to paste it in this artboard. I'm just going to move it up till it's like barely out of the view, but still within this this artboard. And I'm gonna lower its opacity to like 0. So now you'll see that when we do a preview and we click on broccoli, notice how this element changes. See, it just moved up and went from 100% opacity to 0 opacity. And now you can see it back. That's pretty cool, right? And we can do something even more interesting. We can swap these elements. So for example, I can have the select. I'm going to copy it from here and I'm going to paste it in search results. And I'm just going to move it to the left like this, 0 opacity. And I'm going to copy this one and I'm going to paste it here. And I'm going to move this to the right. Something like that, also 0 opacity. So now XD, because we have both elements or these elements in both screens, XD will also animate their attributes. In this case, position and opacity. So let's do a quick test. So pay attention here. See? That's very cool. And those are just some of the things you can do with Auto-Animate. I strongly encourage you to check out the examples I showed you at the beginning of this video, and also Daniel White's course. And most of all, just play around with it. It's super easy to create these very fancy transitions. So you should definitely experiment with these. And that's it for this lesson on Auto-Animate and for this course. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it gave you all the information you need to get started with Adobe XD. This is a very simple app, but very powerful, right? It's simple to use, but it's very powerful in the sense that you can basically create anything, websites, mobile apps, icons, just whatever you want to do in terms of UI or UX design. XD is a very, very good app to use. So again, thank you for watching. I'm Adi Purdila, and until next time, take care.